Before I get into villains, I'll go briefly over the non-villain human characters. For the most part, they really aren't all that important in the first two films. Despite the fact that Andy is the most important thing to the protagonists, his character is, well, as plastic as he looks in the first movie. He's really just the cliche kid. He's not a bad character, the movies just aren't about him. It really isn't until Toy Story 3 that the human characters are given any kind of attention, and they're still understated. Still, that doesn't mean complaining. The movie's called Toy Story after all. Besides, you can only stare at this for so long before you start to question whether or not there are any human characters in this movie. My favorite human character is probably Bonnie, though. This kid is so damn cute. And she has a Totoro plush. I want a Totoro plush. Coolest little kid ever. And like Buster, an example of a character that can leave an impression despite the fact that they're not in the film very much. Toy Story had some excellent villains, so let's look over them. The first movie had Sid, this delightfully sadistic little kid who blew his toys to bits and then experimented on them for fun. Kid's going to grow up as a homicidal maniac. I always loved this part of the movie as a kid and still do, and it's one of the few times that the toys ever directly interact with a human being. You know, for a film that was apparently not edgy enough for Katzenberg, this is some pretty messed up imagery, and I love every minute of it.
Take good care of your toys, because if you don't, we'll find out, Sid. We toys can see everything.
So play nice.
Toy Story 2 has two villains, three if you count Zurg, but I don't really, he's not in it for very long. There's Al, who's okay as a villain. He's pretty standard as far as antagonists go. He's just the greedy creep who steals Woody from Andy's house and tries to sell him, and the rest of the collectible toys from Woody's Roundup to a museum in Japan. Pretty two-dimensional. Stinky Pete is a lot more interesting because he's considerably more sinister and his motivations go beyond greed. Basically, he was the toy that never got bought. Now, after spending years and years in a box, he thinks it will finally pay off with the museum display. You also didn't really expect him to be the villain because he seemed like a nice enough guy and he had supposedly never been out of his box. Then there's Toy Story 3, and I think unlike the Prospector, most of us had this bear pegged.
I thought I heard new voices. Welcome to Sunnyside, folks. I'm Lotso Huggin' Bear, but please call me Lotso.
Buzz Lightyear, we coming.
First thing you gotta know about me, I'm a hugger.
Lotso, who in all honesty takes the cake for the most loathsome and deliciously creepy Toy Story villain. A pink bear that smells like strawberries. Seriously though, phenomenal villain. Great motivation, totally hateable, an evil bastard, but also a little sympathetic. His story is pretty sad, to be honest. Although from there he becomes such a despicable character, I can't say he doesn't deserve what he gets. There's also Big Baby, who's creepy as hell, but probably even more sympathetic, and Ken, who is pretty hilarious. That scene with the heels, I laughed my ass off at that the first time I saw this movie. There were some other villains as well, but they were mostly thugs and this monkey thing, which was probably responsible for a lot of nightmares after this movie. All in all, the characters are good in all three movies. They're fun to watch, and new additions are integrated well into the films. Some of the characters may fall by the wayside, but with a cast this big, it's hard to blame them for that. The first Toy Story had a simple charm, and while the graphics don't really hold up so well anymore, I still think the story does. It's well done. The pacing is great, and it has that quirkiness and heart that would eventually be a staple in Pixar films to come. As is generally the case, the sequels are urged to be set on a grander scale, which in some cases can hurt the film a little. The farthest the first film had the characters venture was to the pizza place. The majority of the rest of the film literally took place across the street, and it was a feat for Buzz and Woody to just get home from there. things could have easily gotten silly fast, and the sequels are not exactly guiltless of this, but it mostly works.
I'm still in this.
Story-wise, well, to be honest, the only film of the three that I have no gripes with is actually the first movie. Save the animation, but it was the first CG movie ever made, so you can't really fault it for that. The pacing is great, the developing relationships are great, it never drags, and everything that needs to be there is there. A lot of that probably comes from the fact that the animation style was still very new, and they couldn't really add unnecessary stuff because the movie was already going to be a bitch to make. Sometimes having those kinds of restrictions works well in the film's favor. The second film is also pretty good, although I don't think it's nearly as tight as the first. I think my least favorite part of the second film was the scene with Zurg and the other Buzz. There are a couple of good gags with the other Buzz Lightyear, but I don't think that film would have lost much of anything if that whole subplot were taken out. As for the third film, well, to be honest, I thought it really dragged at parts. Especially the escape scene and that scene at the dump got a little tiresome to me. Toy Story 3 has a habit of overcomplicating things. The story is relatively simple, but it gets so involved at points and does tend to get a bit silly. So after having said that, I'm naming the first film the best, right? No, actually. So let's talk about how this franchise grew over time, and I'm not just talking about the animation. The first film is pretty flawless as far as the story goes, but what it's not is, well, as emotionally deep as its predecessors. It had a lot of heart, but I doubt it reduced many people to tears. The second film played more into the psychology of the characters on the screen and tugged on the audience heartstrings a lot more, particularly in the scene with Jessie. It was also pretty much remade from scratch in 9 months. One of the first few animated sequels to be considered as good as the original, if not better. I think it's the weakest of the three. It's a damn good film, don't get me wrong, and the fact that it was finished as quickly as it was is amazing. But while well executed, it still comes across as being closer to a typical sequel to me than Toy Story 3 did. So, Toy Story 3. Why? Well, to be honest, I think I'm being manipulated by a sinister and yet somewhat intuitive force. To explain, let me pose a question. Why does Toy Story 3 work so damn well?
Some other folks might be a little bit smarter than I am, big and stronger too. Maybe, but none of them will ever love you the way I do. It's me and you, boy, and as the years go by, a friendship will never die.
Because a good portion of the audience for Toy Story 3 were the same people who grew up watching Toy Story. And if you were around the proper age for Toy Story, then when Toy Story 3 came out, you were most likely going through a major change in your life. Maybe heading off to college, graduating, had graduated recently. I was in my last year. That means you were probably saying goodbye to your childhood, which included Toy Story. So a story about moving on and growing up maybe hit the right chords with a lot of people. And you probably bawled like a baby at the end of this film, which I did. That's an ingenious move on Disney and Pixar's part. A little manipulative, but in a way that's acceptable because I think it was done with the best of intentions. It was completely aware of its target audience. Anyone with complaints that this movie wasn't really as kid-friendly as the other two, yeah, you're probably right, because it was probably made more with the original Toy Story fans in mind, rather than trying to be accessible to new fans. You can't deny it doesn't work in the film's favor. Other companies should take notes, because this is how you do it. The Toy Story sequels are better than most sequels because a lot of work was put into making them great, and a lot of effort was made to appeal to a specific audience. They could have easily tried to appeal to the next generation of kids, but they chose to appeal to the original, and since most of us are still big kids somewhere deep inside, it worked. Same reason the new Muppet movie worked really well. Made for people who love the Muppets, by people who love the Muppets, with the knowledge that while the world changes around you, some things will always be the same. The film may be a little darker and a little more grown up, and it may be about letting go, but these are the same characters that we loved when we were younger. Pixar always said that they tried to make films that they wanted to watch, that they enjoyed. So who would be excited for Toy Story 3? Well, the people who love Toy Story. So they catered primarily to them instead of trying to appeal to people who didn't grow up with the original films. And it worked. Worked on me. I'm naming the third movie the best. So maybe my decision is slightly indicative of my age. You know what? It doesn't matter. Why? Because this is probably the highest rated animated franchise of all time. Why pick one? They go great together. Watch them back to back like I did. I'm the animated heroine, and who am I kidding? I never grew up.
Does the red light mean it's going? Come on, say happy birthday to Molly.
You got a friend in me.
Oh, charming.
You got a friend in me.
Look how tall you're getting.
When the road looks rough ahead and you're miles and miles from your nice warm bed, just remember what your old